So the next story is, I think I see a temple down there, and a temple means it's Rebecca Bibliotheca's story.
It is. And I remember that talk from 2013. And boy, we all had such high hopes for Elder Uchtdorf until
we were so naive.
The inevitable happened. We should have seen it coming, but it didn't. So, all right. Yes, let's dive into a little bit of temple news. The last couple of weeks have been pretty eventful. We have the Heber Valley, Utah temple construction has started. I mean, you guys have been following this along with us for the last 2 years, back and forth, dark skies, in and out of court. And finally, they have actually always been able to start for the last 2 years, but there've been, legal maneuvering. So now they've decided they feel like they're pretty much in the clear, and they are going to start building. Here we go in Heber. It says nearly 3 years after its groundbreaking, 3 years, construction work on the Heber Valley Temple is now underway. The Wasatch County had issued a permit 2 years ago, like I just said, but because of all the lawsuits and the things going on, they didn't start building, but now they feel pretty confident. And there's a picture of the lovely field where the temple, which you can see below that, is going to go. But there are some interesting issues around this construction. I had someone who lives in Heber send me this picture and say, hey, construction has started. So I don't think we have to ask.
The temple spire is going to be.
And that's exactly right. And I think that's what that person is showing. That is a representation to scale of the temple spire. Now, there are some strong feelings in Heber, and having followed it for 2 years, I absolutely understand why. But you can see construction moving in. There's a porta potty. That's always the first sign, right? They're going to get going, and some ground is being moved. But it's not just the ground, right? This is going to get really interesting. So at the same time this is happening, the opponents from that lawsuit, they asked the court for an emergency stop to the construction because they're appealing to the Supreme Court of Utah. I think we talked about this the last time we were on the newscast. So they're saying, hey, you're still premature. We still are going to be in front of the Supreme Court. This is exactly what happened in Cody, if you remember, and the church just sped in and started building. And then the Supreme Court in Wyoming did rule, go ahead. So I think the church is assuming that this is going to happen too. It says the residents group intends to appeal the judge's decision. That was the judge that said, go ahead, you can build, to the Utah Supreme Court, challenging the legality of the Legislative Development Agreement, the LDA, used to approve the temple project.
And this is the one where the issue had to do with the actual land for the temple being on county land,
exactly.
But like surrounded by the city.
Yeah, and they just swept it through the county commission. Several of them were actually standing next to President Nelson with a golden shovel at the groundbreaking, and they basically overturned everything as far as dark skies and building size that had been there for 20 years. They overturned it like that. And of course, a lot of people feel you would not have done that for any other kind of development but the LDS church. So, and I think you guys saw, I show it quite often, one of the residents trying to talk to the county, and they're up there saying, we're not the Church of Latter-day. What are we? They completely aligned themselves with the church. So yeah, it's an interesting scenario, but the church is building. Now, here's what is very interesting. Let us talk about water, right? We haven't talked about this for a couple years, but now that they're starting to build, this is back in the spotlight again. So let's see, here we go. Okay. The church begins work at Heber Valley, Utah temple site as opponents appeal to the Utah Supreme Court. And if you look at this article right here, this is in the Deseret News. It says the work soon will turn to removing what a groundwater study said could be as much as 1 million gallons of water or more. That sounds like a lot, right?
That's a lot of water, 1 million gallons.
It sounds like a lot.
You guys having a drought down there, by the way?
Yeah, I know. We're going to kind of talk about that. So 1 million gallons is what the Deseret News last week said is going to be removed. Okay. Now, let's look at this article. This is from the KPCW, and it says Heber Valley Temple construction begins. It says work will include extensive dewatering. That's removing water from the ground. A 2023 groundwater study estimated that the church would need to pump up to 1 million gallons a day for several weeks to keep the site dry enough for construction. So
1 million gallons a day
for several weeks. So that is different from what the Deseret News said. They just made it sound like up to 1 million gallons overall.
This article, a freaking river going under this temple.
Yeah, well, groundwater, it's there. And I've looked at all these studies. This is a really fascinating situation. So this article says, okay, it's going to be a couple weeks of pumping out all of this water during construction. And, that's typical. A lot of sites have to be dewatered. Okay, so let's see what the church's temple site says about what's going to happen. It says significant dewatering of the site will be necessary to keep the ground dry enough for construction. It is estimated that up to 1 million gallons of water a day will need to be pumped for several weeks. I mean, that sounds like a lot, but only several weeks. And several weeks. Okay, so here's where it gets weird. This is all current. This all came out within the last couple of weeks. Let's tell the truth about water, and let's go back 2 years, right? This is when I started following it on Mormonish. Okay. So here is an article from 2023, right? Again, from the KPCW. And it talks about a woman who is concerned by the studies that she's seen, the information that she's been getting about how much water is going to be taken out of the ground. She says, our concern is all of that's going into the creek, it's going downstream into the Provo River, and then eventually down the canyon. So it's not benefiting the Heber Valley. So in 2023, people are looking at these studies, they're paying attention, and they're kind of raising the alarm. But let's talk about how much water actually is going to be moved. And again, this is from the 2023 article. It seems like they had amnesia almost when they started putting out the information 2 years later. Here it says, I know from the schematics, there's going to be 20 wells that go down 40 feet. And it talks about how many gallons per day, per minute. And it talks about the different phases of watering. And just to kind of break it down, for about 6 to 8 weeks, there is going to be 1 million gallons a day, right? A day. That's not what it said in the Deseret News. After that, that'll slow down a little bit, maybe to 500,000 gallons. But what they're not talking about is that forever on this site, it's going to be up to 300,000 gallons a day, forever. None of the articles that came out in the last couple of weeks have mentioned that. And we're going to talk to an engineer friend of mine. I'm going to read some things that say, maybe this isn't as drastic as it sounds, but I still think that they should be upfront about what they're saying, the amount of water that is going to be removed. So I made this little meme where it says, and this is from the groundbreaking, and then we're going to pump out this much water from the ground, but you don't need to worry about it. All you need is the living water of Christ. So that's my dewatering meme. So, okay.
This seems kind of wasteful.
Yeah, it seems like a lot more than they're talking about, right? You saw those 3 articles. They're saying up to, or maybe a little more. None of them mentioned in 2025 that it goes on forever, right? Back in 2023, we knew this, right? So let's show this clip really quick. This is from Mormonish. When we first got involved with Heber, we were first involved with Cody, and then Heber contacted us and said, hey, we have a situation too. Do you guys think you could cover this? Because no news outlet will talk to us. So you're going to see 2 residents that know a lot about the water. And I'm just going to show that back in 2023, exactly a year from yesterday is when this podcast came out, we were already talking about the water.
90 million gallons of water?
That appears correct. So they've done a dewatering study through one of the engineering firms they've hired, and they're going to put in 20 pumps around the property to take water off the lot. If you read that engineering study, they need to dig down roughly 42 feet to build the basement or foundation for the size of the temple. The problem is 10 feet down, they hit water. So roughly 30, 32 feet of water has to disappear from that foundation and be pumped off site, which is problem number 1. It's a class 1 aquifer, which is where we get our drinking water from. And based on the analysis, it's 90 million gallons of water that has to be pumped off to put the foundation in.
Is that a year, a month? What?
That's over the course of the year based on the estimates in the engineering study.
Okay.
So if you look at the low end, because again, it is an estimate, it's 65 million gallons. If you look at the high end, it could be as much as 125 million gallons. But again, the estimate in the report says about 90 million gallons needs to be pumped off. Simply to put
and
the
is this continuing? Will they have to continue to pump every year, keep the pumps running? If the temple's built there, they'll have to continue to siphon the water off.
Correct. And that's because it's in a water aquifer where all the water runs through the valley. So again,
Okay,
it's
that's
coming
enough.
from the
So
Jordan
I'm
Valley,
just showing that Mormonish,
underneath
we were
ground,
talking to
running
the
up-
residents about this watering problem 2 years ago. And the residents kept trying to go to the county council and go to some people saying, is there some oversight just so we can understand, is this okay?
Who on
And
earth gave them the permit to build there?
the county who stood next to President Nelson with a golden shovel. This is what I'm trying to say. And the reason, here's a planned Heber Valley Temple may need to pump out 1 million gallons of groundwater daily, right? That even the Tribune understood back then. Today, everybody seems to have lost that memory. Now, it's because of the baptismal font, right? That is underground. And if it were on a slab or something, they would not have to continue to dewater every single day for that baptismal font. So, and it's very expensive to continue to do that. So the citizens back then in 2023, once they kind of understood what was going on, they were concerned. So the church put out some information, kind of a fact about, what's going on. The question was, the church will pump away millions of gallons of groundwater a day, and this valuable resource will be lost to the citizens of Wasatch County. And their answer was just to assure them basically that the stream where they are pumping it can handle the water. That was the answer. So, that wasn't really the question.
Yeah, they didn't answer the question, did they?
They didn't answer the question, but they reassured everybody that the stream can more than handle it. Okay. So I wrote a letter to the Deseret News. I don't do that very often, but once I saw their article where they said we're going to pump out 1 million gallons or more, and I thought that is not accurate. So I'm going to read my letter. I don't think they published it, but I wrote it, so I'll read it. So I said, this is not a truthful representation by the Deseret News. As part of the Heber Valley Temple construction, 1 million gallons of water a day will be pumped out of the ground for a month or more. That's the size of almost 2 Olympic swimming pools a day. I know it's very hard for us to visualize, but that's, maybe you can wrap your brain around that. After a month, this amount will be reduced to the size of 1 Olympic swimming pool a day through construction, right? Dewater the ground. Then going forward forever, they will dewater the site using a gravity method. That's just kind of natural water flowing out. And that'll be up to 125,000 gallons. Additionally, they'll have to have those pumps because of the below ground baptismal font. And that can be 150 gallons a minute. So the total volume of water per day pumped out, adding those two methods together, will be up to 300,000. This is about half the size of an Olympic pool every day going forward forever and ever. Amen. And then the water is going to go into a stream where it could evaporate, could be used by plants and animals, or it could just run downstream to other areas. Okay. So any thoughts on that before I go to the next part?
I'm guessing Heber has a lot of other water supplies.
Yeah, I think so. And again, I have a picture of a drought here, because to a layman, when I read this, I'm like, oh my gosh, you're dewatering the ground. We're in the middle of a drought. So I decided that I better talk to my friend. Believe it or not, I have a friend who is a water resource engineer who has designed dewatering systems for large scale construction projects. Now, I'm not going to read through each of these because that would take too much time, but I will flip through them so you guys can pause on them. But his answer is sort of, it's kind of typical, for what you would do with a construction project. His idea was sort of, if they put it on a slab, they would not have to continually pump the water away. Some of the questions that he addressed, he kind of saw that were out there, is the amount of water is excessive. Again, he's saying, he's seen this before. The LDS Church has plenty of money to do this. Should they do it? I don't know, but they can do it, right? And apparently they've, talked to all the people, got all the permits, and so I guess they can do it. Another question he wanted to address is the groundwater table will not recover. He says it's the top 30 feet of water table. Since the water table was encountered 15 feet below the ground, the water table will likely recover, though not fully due to the ongoing pumping. So it is going to impact the groundwater and the area. Any impacts will likely to be in limited parcels close to the site, like a shallow well. So some residents there could see, their wells dry up, I guess. So, but again, my friend is like, they do this. People do this. What do they plan to do with the water? That's a big question because we're in the middle of a drought. And he says they plan to discharge the water into Lake Creek that runs right next to the site. I've seen it, and it's going to go down the hill, and it'll eventually end up in Deer Creek Reservoir, which if the water were underground, it would also end up in Deer Creek Reservoir. However, putting the water out into the stream, you can have some evaporation, but not that big of a deal. So I'm kind of just putting this out there. If anybody,
Is that the reservoir?
Yeah, that's Deer Creek. Yeah, absolutely beautiful.
The water gets to the same place anyway.
It does, but it's not natural the way it happens, if that makes sense. It's dumped into a stream and, goes down the hill, goes somewhere else. So I guess I'm just putting this out there if anybody else wants to look into this, because it's kind of an interesting scenario. But I did have, a different perspective once I talked to my friend who was the engineer, but I also understand the perspective of the people who live in Heber, especially people right around there. All that pumping, all that water moving, the houses around it. I mean, do they need flood insurance? What exactly is going to happen? So if anybody else wants to look into water, or that's something that you are involved in professionally, go ahead. But the main thing that I wanted to discuss here is just the fact that it seems like the articles that are coming out are not mentioning pumping in perpetuity, if we can call it that. It is always going to be dewatered.
That's what we did in the Celestial Kingdom.
I think it is. Yikes. Dewatered to the tune of half an Olympic-sized pool. So, okay, that's Heber.